Right then, hello. We often picture the birth of an American state as a pretty civilized affair. Maps are drawn, some hands are shaken, and that's that. But the story of Ohio, well, that's something else entirely. It wasn't born in some quiet committee room. It was forged in the heat of a brutal, absolutely desperate war. This was a war for a land that was defined, dominated, and quite literally nourished by its incredible rivers. So let's dive in.
First things first, we need to get our bearings. We're not talking about the neat rectangle of Ohio that you see on a map today. The Ohio Country, as it was known, was this vast, sprawling, resource-rich wilderness, all lying west of the Appalachian Mountains. It was the great prize, really, the next frontier, a tangled paradise of forests and, most importantly, waterways.
And this old map here just illustrates the point perfectly. I mean, just look at it. It's not a map of roads or towns, it's a map of rivers. You've got the Ohio, the Scioto, the Great and Little Miami, the Maumee. These were the arteries of this land. And for centuries, long before any Europeans had even dreamed of this place, this was a vibrant, populated homeland for a whole host of Native American nations. And this just goes to show you how far from empty this land really was. Each of these nations had its heartland tied directly to a specific river system. You had the Shawnee all along the Scioto, the Miami people in their namesake valley. You see, these rivers weren't just landmarks on a map. They were the very basis of their economy, their culture, their entire existence. This was a well-established home.
And this really gets to the heart of the whole conflict. This wasn't just some squabble over territory. It was a fundamental, completely irreconcilable clash of worldviews. On one hand, for the native nations, this was a homeland, a shared resource, where winning a fight meant literal survival. But for the American colonists, it was a commodity, a land of opportunity to be divided up, privately owned and farmed. For them, victory meant expansion and wealth. These two visions, they just couldn't exist in the same space.
So, what was it that finally lit the fuse on this powder keg? Well, it was the end of the American Revolution. In 1783, a treaty was signed all the way over in Paris that would change the fate of the Ohio Country forever.
And here it is, the core injustice that really made war inevitable. Great Britain, a foreign power thousands of miles away, just gave the land away to the brand new United States. The Shawnee, the Miami, the Delaware, the people who actually lived there, they weren't at the table. They weren't even in the room. Their homeland was signed away without a single word of their consent, and a flood of settlers was about to be unleashed.
This quote from historian Jason Edwin Anderson just cuts right to it, doesn't it? For the American settlers, who the Shawnee called the Long Knives, this wasn't really about abstract ideals of liberty anymore. It was about land. Raw, fertile, promising land. And they were absolutely prepared to fight tooth and nail for it.
What came next was a really grim and bloody pattern. Treaties would be made, like the promise inside the Northwest Ordinance to protect tribal lands. And then those treaties were almost immediately broken by a relentless wave of settlers pushing west. The response, as you can imagine, was violent. By 1790, a brutal frontier war had completely engulfed the region. Raids and retaliations just became a part of daily life.
But here's the thing. This wasn't just a chaotic, disorganized resistance. In response to the American advance, the tribes of the region did something truly remarkable. They put aside their old rivalries and formed a powerful military and political alliance to make a unified stand.
This alliance was known as the Western Confederacy, and it was led by brilliant military tacticians like the Shawnee Chief Blue Jacket and the Miami Chief Little Turtle. This was a formidable force. Their goal was crystal clear and very political: stop the American seizure of their land and establish the Ohio River as a permanent, non-negotiable boundary. And they had a powerful, if maybe a bit unreliable, ally in the British, who were still hanging around in forts and happy to encourage the resistance.
Now, the new United States government vastly underestimated this confederacy, and they paid a terrible price for it. In 1790, an American force under General Harmer was soundly beaten, but the very next year brought a true disaster. An army under General Arthur St. Clair was ambushed at dawn by the Confederacy's warriors. It wasn't just a defeat, it was an absolute annihilation.
The numbers here are just staggering. Out of an army of roughly 1,000 men, more than 800 were either killed or wounded. Think about that. Only 24 men escaped unharmed. To this day, it remains one of the worst defeats the United States Army has ever suffered at the hands of indigenous forces. It was a catastrophe that sent shockwaves all the way back to President Washington himself.
And this image here gives us a sense of the warriors who inflicted that staggering defeat.
These weren't just some disorganized rabble, they were disciplined, they were highly motivated, and they were fighting on their own turf, which they knew like the back of their hand. In these early years of the war, they were without question the superior military force in the Ohio country.
Well, the news of St. Clair's defeat absolutely infuriated President Washington. The young nation's pride was wounded, and its grand westward ambitions were completely stalled. He realized that these half measures, these poorly planned campaigns, they just wouldn't work. It was time to bring the full, organized might of the American military to bear and settle this question of Ohio once and for all.
So Washington turned to a very different kind of general, a man nicknamed Mad Anthony Wayne. And Wayne did not repeat the mistakes of the generals who came before him. There would be no rushing in. He demanded time to build and train a new professional fighting force that he called the Legion of the United States. He drilled them relentlessly. And as he pushed north, he did it methodically, building a chain of forts to protect his supply lines. This was a professional army on the march.
The inevitable showdown came on August 20th, 1794, near the Maumee River, at a place called Fallen Timbers. Here, Wayne's disciplined legion finally met the warriors of the Confederacy. Now, the fight was sharp, but the training, the discipline, and the sheer numbers of the legion, well, they proved decisive. The Western Confederacy was broken.
A military victory on this kind of scale is never just the end of a battle. It's always the beginning of a new political reality. The victory at Fallen Timbers gave the United States the power to redraw the entire map of the region, and they wasted no time in doing so. The result was the Treaty of Greenville, signed just a year later. Now, let's be clear, this was not a negotiation among equals. The defeated tribes were forced to give up a massive swath of land, some 25,000 square miles, which makes up most of what we now call Ohio. And notice, too, the treaty specifically claims strategic bits of land right around the river mouths, securing total American control of those vital waterways. The Treaty of Greenville didn't just open the floodgates for settlers, it blew them right off their hinges. You can see the clear cause and effect right here. Almost immediately, new American towns sprang up. Chillicothe was laid out on the Scioto River just 1 year after the treaty was signed. With Native American resistance shattered and the land now legally secured, the population boomed, paving the direct path for Ohio to become a state in 1803.
And so, you see, it all comes back to the rivers. The story of Ohio's birth is really the story of its waterways. For centuries, they had been the lifeblood for the Shawnee, the Maumee, and so many others. After this war, those very same rivers became the arteries for a new nation, carrying settlers, goods, and an entirely new way of life that would transform the continent.
This process, this battle, it forged a new and dynamic American state, and it was a critical step in the great westward expansion of the United States. But it does leave us with a rather profound question, doesn't it? It's a reminder that progress for one people can often come at an immense and tragic cost to another, and that the very foundations of our world are often far more complex and far more contested than they might first appear.